Coelioxys today. Go ahead, Sam.
Okay. So we went through the females. There's lots of similarity in the males to the females, but the males have several different kinds of features that will be new. And I'm going to switch now to sharing my screen and pull up the most common one, Coelioxys sayi. And we'll talk about things in general, and then we'll get very specific. So I think most of you know long abdomen, relatively pointed. The males have a cluster of projections at the back end that I think there's usually, depending on whether you count the laterals, somewhere between 4, 6, and 8. They aren't used widely, even though they're gloriously obvious. And when you vibe them, in other words, you look at a new Coelioxys, there's big differences in what this looks like, but they're difficult to describe accurately, so they're not used a lot in separating. But you should always look at what's going on back here to get a sense of what's happening. Another area that we'll be looking at and concentrating on is these grooves. So here's T1, T2, T3, both have grooves, which are you can see by they're in the shadow right here, but we're going to look at whether these grooves are continuous across the segments or they disappear in the middle. Usually they're always present on the far lateral sides, but the question usually is whether they're present in T2 or T3 across the middle. Additionally, in T2 and in one species on T3, there can be no special features, or there can be some sort of fovea. So fovea just refers to a recess that's not a simple pit. Okay, so there would be a pit. And these can be, they're variable and useful in discriminating. So they're used within the guides too. And they're usually located about between the center line and the lateral edges, just to the, I think just to the north of the groove. I could be wrong. Maybe it's just to the south. We'll look at those a lot. Additionally, another feature that the males have that the females do not, that we'll talk about, is not present here, but underneath the eye, if we turn this to the side, and we'll certainly will be doing this, there is you could call it a fovea, but there's a recess that's running from the mandibles directly below the eye on the cheek. And inside that recess are a variety of patterns of hair. So there could be none, it could be lined with hair. There could be a simple strip of hair towards the top. The sayi, which I have on dock here, is the simple strip on top kind of thing. Also useful. Additionally, leg color can be useful if it's at one end or the other. If it's all red or it's all black, it's useful. If it's in between, then it's the kind of thing to skip. Okay, now let's jump to the guide. So Mike, sadly, at this point does not have a ID guide, dichotomous ID guide for us. And so we're stuck with Discover Life guides. So and you can always, as usual, use Mitchell, and then there's a variety of small revisions that can be tapped into. But within the Discover Life land, what we have are where we look at a number of the features I just mentioned, but we're also looking at something that the females had, which is the presence of oppressed white hair. So prone, lying down, however you want to call them, thick white hairs on the scutellum and in the metanotum. In the metanotum, we talk about patch in the middle, patch across the entire, no, patch in the middle is here, across half or more, or absent as being useful. We're going to talk about grooves in a second. Here's some shots of these various fovea on T2. And then here are some illustrations, which we're going to see, of this pocket this recessed pocket on the underside of the on the side of the cheeks of the males. And then actually can be useful, but again, it's one of these relative things. So you can see from the number of scorings, a lot of them are in some kind of middle state. There's only one that is highly reduced and a few that are really projecting well beyond the rim. So jumping back to our most common Coelioxys in the East, here is sayi, and sayi and octodentata, which we're going to look at next, key roughly out to the same, and there's a difference in the groove pattern. So let's look at, oh, I should also mention, it's not on that first page, but there's a bunch of sternite issues that are useful because the patterns in the sternites are also very variable. So if you have a question regarding whether you're looking at one species or two, often that can be told, sadly not in Coelioxys and octodentata and sayi, but often can be told by the architecture of sternites 4 and 5. So anyway, let's take a dive here. Let's go see if we can find the fovea associated with this species. I'm going to get out of this view and add more light in so we can see into those recessed areas. So let's move to, I'm going to try 90 here. Oh, that's the wrong way. We're going to go up to, how about we're at 500? Oh, that's better. I think I'll go one more. For some reason, it seems to be working at a lower light level, but I maybe didn't have a light on. How about 800? Okay, let's try that. So going back, what we're looking for here are two small fovea, which when you're starting out, it's difficult because if you don't have them, you spend a lot of time looking for something that's not there. So zooming in quite far. So sayi has fovea, as is octodentata. They basically are going to be the same in presentation, but they're small. And so let me focus it a tiny bit. Oops. For some reason, we seem to be going extra slow here in our focusing. Claire, was there something in terms of refresh rate that maybe I clicked off? I'm not sure. Okay, we're going to try and get some better view here, but here's the fovea. It's difficult to see here because it's all dark, but this is an oblong shape, sort of like size of a grain or shape of a grain of rice kind of thing. And there's inside is darkness and no additional pitting like here. You'll see other species have about the same shape, a little wider, and pits inside of it. Let's see if I can get a slightly better view of this going. Add some more light here.
And
And
I
I'm going
am
to,
not sure. I don't remember that being a setting that we've had
Mhm.
to change, but
Okay.
in my photo taking app, there is the software. So maybe it is
Yeah.
somewhere in the settings there.
All right. But it just seems like we're in a slow refreshing rate here. Like I see how
There's
it
also the
just
live
blurs.
selection, but I think you need to have that selected to be casting anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I clicked the live, but it's
So,
something else. Okay.
sorry.
We'll ignore it for now. Maybe at the end we'll play with it. Okay, here's T1. Here's the groove through T2, and I was incorrect in saying it was anterior. It's posterior to the groove. And here you can see pretty well the fovea. So it's oblong in that case, and you can't see any pits. Let's zoom in. And I need to shift it a little bit. There's the lovely axilla sticking out, projecting quite far. And here is about as decent a shot as we're going to get of the fovea because it's a dark thing on a dark surface. I really don't like the fact that this is not letting me focus quickly. Interestingly, I can almost see some pits in there, I think. So maybe we'll have to modify that pit's not obviously visible because it does look like if you actually peered into the depth, this is quite deep. There is some pits in this particular one. Any case, we will contrast that and you'll see that. And this is a problem with guides, right? You want it to be pristine. So we'll look at that again. But there's the fovea, okay? And so here's the two grooves. We're going to back out that are important in sayi versus octodentata, and generally important to species. So this is another one that's a little tricky to see. I'm going to shift this so that we're mostly concerned about what's going on in the central sections of the specimen. And what we will see is that in sayi and T2, this pitted groove goes all the way across. In T3, though, this pitted groove sort of peters out and becomes just a few sparse pits, and you really don't have a deep presence of that groove. All right, I'm going to shift the specimen so that hopefully we are looking. The pin is a little bit problematic in that it is curving towards where we would want to see. Let's see what happens. Okay, this might work. Tried to angle it so that the pin is not in the way, yet we can see the middle of the specimen. Focus, please. Again, an oddly slow refresh rate. All right, orienting. T1 is here. This is the rim of T1. This is T2. This is the rim of T2. Here's the groove running through here, and you can see pits lining this whole way. Now, T3 is the one that differentiates us between sayi and octodentata. You can see there's heavily pitted areas in a groove off to either side, and then it sort of fades out. But the problem is not like absolutely no pits and absolutely flat. It's in comparison to what you'll see in octodentata. This is relatively ungrooved, a little bit difficult to see because there's no 3 dimensions here, and then this pitting a whole lot sparse. In octodentata, you see this pitting run all the way across. I have spent so much time looking for some alternative to that character, and have, as I'm sure others have, and have not found anything differently. In general, sayi is ubiquitous kind of everywhere. Octodentata, because I think it may be more associated with Megachile brevis. So all the Coelioxys, I think, are nest parasites on Megachile. People can tell me if that is not the case. These nest parasites do like to jump to other groups periodically. So I'm going to now show you the side of the head, and we're going to look for the pocket under the head. Get a little more magnification here, and should be going down to get it in focus. Dave Smith the other day emailed me and said, hey, you guys take such great pictures. It'd be nice to have them instead of, or I took it to be So maybe we should consider having some of the pictures up too that I can flip to. So not today, Dave Smith, but that was a great suggestion. Okay. So here, I think I mentioned that these furry strips were at the top, but they're actually, if you look at them from underneath, they look like they're on the top, but they're actually from the upright position on a Coelioxys male, it would be on the bottom of this thing. So here is the eyeball, edge of the eyeball is up there. This is the bottom of the head down here. Here are the mandibles out in this direction. And what you're looking for, and as Dave Capper is so much working on, just in general, having a bunch of pictures of all these different characters would be great. So we have things to do. Anyway, now maybe that's it there too. Okay, I'll have to look. I took it as this. So here's the hollow. There's almost no hairs in the middle of it. And then I may be incorrect because I'm going to have to spin this a little bit more as to whether the strip of hairs is this down here, which could be just simply outside, or that right there. So let's spin it some more so that we have a better shot of the interior. Okay, we have a leg partially in the way, but okay, it is at the top. We were looking at, I was confusing the bottom hairs that just were the edge of the thing. So bottom of head, that's a leg in the way. Here's this hollowed out, large hollowed out area, fovea, if you will, I guess. And here's a strip of hairs, and that's all that's in there. Everything else is bare. So that's indicative of a set of species. And if I flip over to Discover Life Guides, and you may want to do this while we are looking and explore some of these things, as you click on the guide you want, here, Coelioxys male, they all do the same thing. You click on menu, this opens up over here, and you have this has button. So I've already clicked it, but if you click the has button, you get all the questions associated with the guide, and you can look at the scoring. So if we go to the area of the facial fovea down here, we look at so we can click at has, so it'll be what, you know, make it English thinking, what has all this information which says we're looking at this hollow area, and a brush or short line of hair just inside the upper edge of depression. And we look, and when we click on that, it shows everything that's been scored for that. So we can see sayi is in there, and quite a few others are in that same category. And because we embrace ambiguity, we also, for many of these species, might be scored for more than one of these characters. So you can get a little more clarity by clicking off has and putting on only. So now you'll have a list of only 8 in this case of species. Here's the 8 species that have this character and have not been scored for anything else. So what that should say is that these species are the most present the clearest case of this, in this case, this character. So you can see sayi is in there, octodentatus is also in there. I'm going to go back to the specimen now. Anyway, while we're talking about these things, you can play around with the guide while I'm futzing with the microscope and see what species might be involved. part of just memorizing general patterns. Note the hair on the eyes, a good character for Coelioxys, as if you need more. So now at this point, I'm going to invert the specimen so we can take a quick look and tour of its sternites, which in the case of many species, because looking at sternites often is problematic because it's upside down. So flipping a specimen upside down can be tricky for people. And also, I lost my train of thought. I was thinking of something else. The abdomens often can be curled over and things like that. So we tend to not put that information down. Although in Coelioxys, for whatever reason, they almost never curl their abdomen up. So usually you do have a good view. It's just a little confusing as to what is going on here. S1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 4 and 5 have stuff going on here. And there's genitalia poking out just to confuse or obscure some things. But we'll do a little bit of looking right now, because we'll come back to this when it's important for discriminating species. But at minimum, this is a good place to look if you're not sure if you have the same or different species.
Hey, Sam, I'm
Right.
going to backtrack.
Yep.
We have a question in the
Yep.
chat. In
Sure.
what cases would it make sense to use only as opposed to has? I suspect you would need to have some knowledge about the amount of variation within the species.
So I use only a lot of times if I want to pull a specimen that I think has a good example of whatever the state of character is that's I'm asking about. So if I want to take a picture of it or I want to show someone, I'm going to choose a species that is scored for only having that versus a species that is scored for having it. So that's the has button, but it's also scored for some of the other categories, which implies that maybe it's ambiguous. In other words, it sometimes has it, sometimes doesn't. Maybe it's difficult to discern whether it does or doesn't. So that's why that's what I use the only.
Great.
Does it make sense?
Yep, they said thank you in the chat.
Okay. So in general, what we're looking at is in 1, 2, 3, 4, you have a strongly sclerotized area and then a translucent extra area. I don't know what to call these differences, but there's a translucent part and a sclerotized part, usually very obvious to separate. And it's not visible here, but there's similarly two sections. This is the genitalia. Oh no, it's actually broken. So you can see the specimen has curled up. So bad example, we'll look at others. But what's happening here, these both seem to be pretty clearly out curved. But in many cases, there can be a notch in the center. There can be something that's greatly concave. One can be concave. The other can be out, convex. So that pattern can be super useful. Anyway, bad example because the bottom has been torn up here. So I'm going to now show octodentata, which because it seems to be associated with brevis, and brevis seems to be associated with areas, megachile brevis that is, with areas that are on the spectrum of the dry side of the spectrum. We also see octodentata more often in sand and gravel pits, prairies, that kind of thing. And we also see it less often because brevis is also seen less often. So it kind of fits together. There's a tendency for octodentata, but it's not 100%. for it to have more red in the legs. So that's like a hint. I'm not even sure we mentioned that. Let's jump to our has one, and we'll look for, here's a section on octodentata and sayi, and let's see what we say. Oh, this is these two together. Here's octodentatus. It's octodentatus now. Sorry, there was a ending change, and I'm still using the old lingo a lot of times. Forgive me. So octodentatus with a continuous and deep groove maintaining the same depth all the way across. This is T3. So we really don't even mention the red legs. And with a groove that shallows towards the center, disappearing at the very center. So literally, there's not much else to go on. But traditionally, people have used the presence of reddish, more reddish legs in octodentatus. But we don't mention it, so probably it's not mentioned because there's too many exceptions. All right, let me center this, bring the focus up again. Okay, so we'll start at the high view. So you can see, indeed, this specimen has redder legs than the other one. But like I said, there are exceptions, but this could be a hint that maybe you should think on the octodentatus side of things. I think you might have been looking at the tergites a bit. And what we're looking for are grooves, particularly on T3. T2 basically does the same in both species, but that the groove is, so T1, this is the edge of T1, here's the groove in T2, edge of T2, here's T3, and focus is the lateral side of T3. And as we get towards the middle, I'm going to put this in focus, but you can see that this trough, this groove with pits really goes the entire way and is basically unchanged during that path. And in other words, it doesn't become shallow or anything. Now, it's in more or less in focus there in the middle. And I think, you can see there's really, it'd be hard to say that this central area is any different from this other area. That's the difference. As in many of these kinds of things, you can just say, if you're not sure, octodentatus / sayi. But if you look at enough of these, it becomes most of the time, pretty obvious. We do have some specimens that are left as either or on there. Okay, any questions before we move to another group? We'll just go through species, I think.
Yeah, not so far.
Okay. All right, so put its little tag back on. Claire had some Fish and Wildlife Service people out last week learning their characters, so this was part of that scene. All right, let's start. We'll just do alphabetical. I'll have males for everything, but I have a lot of males. So we're going to go to alternata, which is actually this labeled in the old way in this tray. It's alternatus now. It's relatively big, and it is one of, as you were here for the females, this is one of the donut species. So we'll get it into the scope. Oh, you know what? I'm going to take these. It's too white. The contrast of the label is too white. Get it in there. You can also look up on any of these the species page, which would have the specimen pictures that we have for each of these, or perhaps a better look. All right, so here we are.
Sam, I didn't catch what species.
Alternatus.
Thank you.
and alternatus and hunteri and texana all have this donut area. It's not super obvious on this one, but these are swollen areas around the central ocelli here. Let's see if I can get a different view of that. Let's show the entire specimen first of all. So if we look at this, you can see in this particular case that the central grooves, if we were to key this out completely, the central grooves are disappear in T2 and T3, or it looks like largely on T3. So oh no, this is T2, this is T3, but the grooves in the center are pretty much gone. Get that in focus. In those particular cases, I don't know if this species has fovea or not. That could be fovea there. We're going to take a quick dive here because these are rare species I don't have memorized. And we'll go to our has area, and we'll just do characters. Actually, we need to redo this to get everything on board. Oh, I need to clear off. This is a problem. Like if you leave any check marks, then it messes up all your subsequent ones of using has. You can hit reset at the top of that. So let's look at Coelioxys and its characters really quickly here, so we get a sense. So here, S4 characters and present but widely interrupted. So there you have the disappearances of here. This is where we're going to get into alternatus versus hunteri, and it is scored for both having short fur-like hair in there or bare. So we'll take a look at that. And there's several other things, like including having the scutellum with hair down the middle. So let's see here. We'll come back to the. I'll look at the cheek area, and then we'll look at the difference between alternatus, and I'll pull out hunteri too. Hunteri is not listed here because it's just alternatus sorts of things. So let's look at the cheek, which is actually an ambiguous character of either having nothing or some slight or covered in hair. Let's see what that looks like in this particular specimen. So it could have either. So my guess would be if there's a little bit of hair in there, but you might mistake it for none. Gosh, this thing is moving slowly. Okay, so there's the head. And you don't see, actually, you don't see much of anything. So it's scored for having none or lined with hairs and not without, and without the upper line or strip of hairs up there. So you can see there's a few hairs in there. And that's probably why it's scored for both, because it could be interpreted either way. But it's certainly not like the fovea on an andrina, which is covered in those kinds of hairs. Okay, so now let's concentrate, and I think we're going to go to the head again, probably for alternatus versus hunteri, because we have the donut-shaped swellings on here. Oops, that's the base of the pen. Two. Just feel like we got a lot of lag. So I overshoot the focus. All right, so we're going to the middle ocellus, and this area, a little bit tricky to see here, but this is raised, and on the, at least on the lateral sides, there's no pits, and then going in alignment with the uh, longitudinal axis of the bee, there's pits going in through a small depression to either side of these parens of raised spots. Let's see what the difference is. So this is only the alternatus side of things. We can look at differences here. And choose alternatus and hunteri. So in looking at this, it does show a bunch of differences, but it's really got both in there. And the other one, hunteri, is scored for many more. All right, so quite a bit of information here. So there's pronodal ridge produced, and pronodal ridge produced so that it clearly extends above the surrounding hairs. That's similar to what the females had. Hypostomal cavity, we'll look at the angle to the inner walls. Scutellum, a slightly raised carina at the rim, very similar to the females type of thing, and the median ocellus surrounded by a very slightly raised area, check, which is variably penetrated by pitting, most often broken by lines of pits about 2 pits wide, extending from the ocellus through the anterior edge. So if we go back, that's this line of pits here coming in to this swollen area. I'm going to up the magnification so we can just look at that a little bit more. These are uncommon, but they do seem to show up, at least in the mid-Atlantic, pretty regularly. I think Mike gets them out in the Midwest too. So here's this raised area on either side, and here's the pits moving in, particularly from, well, actually from both sides into the interior. Now, if we take a look at the pronodal ridge, which was mentioned there, let's take a look at that. And in focus. And we're going to look over on this side over here because that's more clear. The other side is being hidden by the pin. And we're looking for the edge, the corner of the pronotum, which in this group often sticks up over the edge of the scutum. Separate features, but different groups. Okay, so I actually don't see it at all here in this shot. Let's see what it says. Pronodal ridge produced but does not rise in height above the surrounding hairs. Okay, that makes sense. We can't see it. Hypostomal cavity, we'll turn that over, and the interior walls forming the outline of corners by the edges roughly 90 degrees, perhaps slightly less. Okay. Take that over. Flip this back down to low magnification and move it to the inside edge. Wow, so slow. Okay, the hypostomal cavity is the location. Ooh, this might be hard to see in this specimen. I may only see the corner because of where the legs are positioned. So the hypostomal cavity is, so I'm going to bring it up magnification-wise. We can see the edge, but it's not great. Where the tongue lies, the slot under the head. So here's the cheeks. So this is that area. Actually, it's a good shot of this largely bare with a few scattered hairs. That's what it's called for. And here's the bottom edge of the genus, slightly carinate, although that's not that useful. Goes to here. This is the tongue lying inside the boundary of the hypostomal cavity. So the hypostomal cavity edge or carina is running up there. And this is, there's a little tip coming out from there, but here's one and here's the other. Looks roughly 90 degrees there. Two interiors is roughly 9 degrees, perhaps less so. It says don't be distracted that the tip can be slightly projecting and the border of the book is slightly concave. Okay. Hopefully we'll, in the hunter eye, we'll see that a little more clearly. I realize that this is not a great shot, but this is the angle. Let's change the focus. We'll go down a little bit. And yeah, it's messy in there. Can't really see, but that's the galea of the tongue and very armored. And here's the two edges like that. And then this is this projecting tip to the both. So hopefully in the next one we'll see better. Now, when we go to the scutellum, so we're looking at where the rear of the scutellum turns over and goes and presents a posterior face versus the dorsal face. And the posterior face is narrow, and that's where these oppressed hairs often lie. I can't recall in this particular species what that pattern is. We'll take a look if they're, unless they're messed up. And what we're looking for is slightly raised carina at a ridge projecting upwards from the dorsal face. So there should be, if you were here last time, you would have seen that tiny bit of the edge of the scutellum projecting upwards, a little lip, but not across the whole section. Right. I think I have to go up now. And that looks good. All right, we're closing in. And the crosshairs are pretty clear. So we're going to go in here. What we're looking for is to see if that area is slightly raised in the center and upturned. Maybe I'll have to turn it sideways, but we're looking. So here's the scutellum, and the face of the scutellum projects downward. The metanodon is below that. There, the metanodon oppressed hairs are across the whole section. This should be raised, but it's not a good angle to see if it is raised. So let's look at it obliquely and see if we can find. Wow. Okay, there we go. I somehow feel like it's refreshing at some odd rate. Okay, I've increased the power. And
if it's any relief, Sam, you only got like about 10 more minutes.
Okay. All right, well, we'll do hunteri, and then we'll have done a good introduction. All right. I don't know that this is showing well. So theoretically, in this area, there should be a raised lip. I think because of time, I'm not going to spend a whole bunch more time looking at that character. We saw it in the females pretty clearly, and I'm just not sure if it's not there or I'm just not showing it well. And we saw the ocelli. So let me just the ocelli with the raised area to either side. So let me. Ooh, what happened to my my? All right, I'll have to find it later. I have lost the tag for the specimen. All right, let's pull up. It's hopefully up. There it is down on the ground. And yeah, if I don't put this back on later, we'll have problems. So hunteri here. Got a male picked out. So in looking at the hunteri characters, so pronotal ridge is produced that it extends above their hairs. We'll look at that first. Hypostomal cavity, the edges form an angle is less than 90 degrees. Scutellum had, which we couldn't see well in the other one, without a raised ridge. We won't bother to look at that because it lacks something that we couldn't see in the other one. And then the middle ocellus surrounded by a clearly raised area, not a slightly raised area, and dulled by beading, inner tube shaped, almost never invaded by pits except by a penetrating line of single pits from the ocellus through the anterior edge, and perhaps a vaguer one to the rear. Okay, so first would be in this hunteri specimen to look for a clearly raised central pronotal angle. Okay. I feel like we're spending the whole time just focusing this microscope. I almost said damn microscope, but I didn't.
But then you did, so does it count?
No.
Great. This is a good rule.
It is. Okay. So in this case, what we're looking for is a pronotal ridge projecting, or flange in this case is what it looks like, projecting above the surrounding hairs. There it is, clearly up and above the edge where we couldn't even find it last time. So I think that's relatively clear. Then we're looking at the hypostomal cavity, and we're looking for that cavity is angles, ignoring the projecting tip. Let me see if I get this at a good spot here, is going to be less than 90 degrees in its formation. Oops. All right. We can see it, I think, pretty well this time. All right, so here's a hypostomal cavity. There's the galea or sheath, or is that the labrum? No, that's the labrum. There's the galeum below there. So that's right. Megachilidae have these really long labrums. But this is the edge on either side of uh, the hypostomal cavity. And then here's the edge of the cheek coming in. Here also in this species is the hollow area, depression, if you will. I'm trying to get the darn thing in focus. And in this case, there are not a lot of hairs, but there's a lot more hair here than there were in alternatus. But again, is that, and you can see the other hairs over there too, whether that's uniformly throughout or not. This is the angle, and we're not straight up and down, but you can see where the angle would go. And you can see on this side, this tip. So there's a tip that projects out a bit. And I don't know what the other species of Coelioxys have for that tip, but that would be an interesting area to explore, like Mike's explorations of the antennal cleaning characters. So anyway, this angle here is supposed to be less than 90. It's a little bit difficult to tell from this angle because we're not really looking at it in the proper plane. But and so I'm looking at it and go like, well, it could go either way for me, from slightly oblique to less than. But in theory, we would be, which we have no time to do, wiggling it back and forth to get that angle documented. And then in addition to the lack of the flange on the scutellum, we have a clearly raised donut shape area on top of the head instead of vaguely raised. Alternatus had the more vague section. This was supposed to be much clearer in presentation, and certainly can see it better here. Here's these two, this raised area around, and there should be a single line, not as wide of a line, of pitting invading that area. Easy to overshoot. Some hair there, but I'm going to bring it up a notch here. But you can see the raised areas is clearer than in the other one, and there is supposed to be just a single line coming in from here. It's hard to tell with the hair, but it seems to present, at least in this specimen, as much narrower gap with pits going into the center. And then something is going on back there, I'm not sure, but also coming in from the rear. So those would be the main features between two tricky to ID things. Since we don't have a whole lot more time, I'm not going to dive into some of the other groups. This is where the raised area, which in theory this does not have a raised area, would go. Since we have this specimen on deck, we're going to shift to look at the abdomen and the tergites, and then we'll look at the sternites, and we will call it done. But we can also take questions as we go.
There's no questions in the chat right now.
There are or are not?
Nope.
Nope. Okay, they're stunned by the information here. So I'm pretty sure that in the guide it said there were no fovea here, and you see that we have this fairly uniform pitted area. This is where the fovea would be. I don't see anything. I see less ruggedness in general, pits further apart. This is just the vibe of this particular group. T1, T2, here's the lateral groove. This is very nicely seen here. Disappears. So there is no groove through the middle there. And it's a little bit ambiguous here with T3. But I believe, okay, T1, there's the rim, that's the rim of T3. It looks like, again, there's nothing going on in the center there either. So there's a good case of it being absent. If we look at the rear end, which has no explained characters, we can kind of see that for example, in sayi and octodentata, all these other additional points were well recessed from the tip, and they're kind of all close together. So it would be another situation where simply looking at the differences within your collection would tell you, oh my gosh, these cannot be the same species, which is basically what taxonomists do when they're trying to figure out whether they have a new species or not. They're comparing directly to its closest members, trying to look for, I think in general, I always look for two different things, because one different thing might just be some kind of sport. Now we're looking at the sternites. That wasn't used in this particular characters, but if you recall, we had torn off sternites in the last one. So here's the genitalia picking out. Here's the architecture of the back end. This should be S6, 5, and 4. So if we look, so these two, 4 and 5, have this interesting stuff that are useful. So if we go in a little bit more, we can kind of see on F5. So here's the one rim, and then there's this one rim edge, and then these are called double rims, I think, in the Coelioxys parlance. And then there's a second one here that's just peeking out, and it's, I think, a little bit hard to see, but I think you might be able to have a notion that that's concave or notched at the tip. Now, if we move to, carefully move to S4, so there theoretically is the notched area of the two. Is it notched? Or am I looking at, okay, let me back off 1 second. Maybe it's not notched. I'd have to look at this more. And here you have, here's a translucent rim. It seems to be convex the whole way, as is the secondary one. So not greatly illuminating in terms of differences, but you'll see other ones that have a lot going on. So I think, Claire, you're saying we're probably out of time.
Yep, we're at 2:01, so I'm gonna pull the hook.
Okay.
But I wanted to say another thing that I missed saying at the beginning. I'm trying to go back through now, both transcripts that are auto-generated by teams, but also going through past transcripts and running those through a program to get get them. So if anybody has been keeping great notes and wants to help me screen those for species names, I would super appreciate it. Or if you have interns or something like that. So just let me know so that we can improve this for all of us. And
Great.
I'm going to end the recording now and log us out.
So, Claire, I would say, are those transcripts something that the web is scraping and indexing? In other words, you would want that to happen so that someone says, oh, I'm interested in Coelioxys hunteri and identification, and it would say, oh, well, hey, someone talked about Coelioxys hunteri on this obscure website.
Yes. So
Okay.
we can talk about that more, but yes, I was going to basically hopefully put a
That's
table of
mhm,
contents on the Elmira site, which would make it
mhm,
searchable.
yeah,
And
and
plus those are
findable.
also posted there already. So that's the short answer, but I'm going to go now.
Okay, all right.
Okay,
All right.
cool. Thank you, everybody. See you next week.
Okay, thanks. All right, any other questions before I dive off? You can unmute. I haven't been looking at chats at all. Right. All right.